So good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to you, Rick. Today with me, I have Rick Hall, who is CEO of Cogenity. I'm super pleased to have you on the podcast. Rick, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Ivo. It's great to see you and to join you on your podcast.
Excellent. So as CEO of Cogenity, can you say a few words about what was the initial vision for starting the company?
Yeah, thanks, Ivo. So, as I think I've been in the data space for a long time, and probably like a lot of people, it was an accident, right? So, I was a C programmer way back in the day, and somebody had a database, and we had to figure out where to put the data, and that got me interested in data modeling, and kind of the rest is kind of history. I started doing consulting work on databases in the early days of data warehousing, so I was kind of lucky, and I was kind of there during the foundation times. From consulting, went to starting up a company with this idea that we were going to build a generic database platform that would allow us to solve any analytic use case, kind of a data warehouse in a box. That company was G4 Analytics. We founded it in September of 2001. That's a story into itself. Ultimately sold that company to Nielsen, ran the global analytics business for Nielsen retail for a few years. I went on to be the CTO of a retail services company where I had everything around product and technology, and ultimately then decided to found what is Cogenity. And the real foundation of why Cogenity was kind of in my experiences at both Nielsen and at Acosta, which was a retail services firm, we built big, extensive data pipelines to do AI, to do, kind of classic BI. But no matter what we did, there was always somebody at the edge of the business who had a different use case. They needed to add additional data. They needed to pivot in a different way. Whatever it was, our pipelines were very structured and couldn't support it. So what did they do? They went around us. They went back to the source data, pulled that source data out onto their laptops or wherever, probably put it in Excel and manipulated it to their end. And we were not really able to support them. And they were doing whatever, and there was no governance about it. So the founding view of Cogenity was we really needed to create collaboration between the analyst community at the edge of the business, people who are doing real problems, and the data engineering team who's building pipelines. And so the foundation of Cogenity is collaborative analytics. It's about creating this kind of reusable component-based architecture for analytics that can be contributed to by both engineers and analysts.
That's a very interesting way of thinking about data analytics, because in engineering, we're kind of used to trying to create modular, reusable components, oftentimes over-engineering things. But the data space was always this different approach to doing things that in software engineering. So this collaborative analytics is an interesting concept. How does that use case and feature set of Cogenity differ and add on to what, let's say, the big platforms like Databricks or Snowflake have in their, or AWS have in their native tool set?
Sure, I think so. I think there's a couple different things. So the first is that most of the platforms that are out there tend to treat the engineering world and the analyst world as separate, kind of worlds. So the engineers build pipelines, they build, schemas, et cetera, star schemas or whatever their approach is. And the analysts come and access that maybe through a BI tool or maybe through, some AI workload. But the two are really separate. And so if the analyst teams need something different, the tooling is different. And so there's not really a collaborative environment across that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that most organizations, the reality is they don't have one data platform. They have many. So, our CTO likes to say every big company has the data platform they've always had. They've had the data platform they're heading towards, and they have the data platform they acquired in some acquisition, right? We have customers that have a dozen data platforms. And, if I think about my history, I was thinking about the other day, there have been 7 generations of data architectures for analytics in the time that I've been around. It's kind of crazy.
Wow.
But in that time, generations, the vendors always said the same thing to the customer, which was, move your data to my platform. And as soon as you do, I'll provide you all this value, right? And the move the data to my platform, well, that's a big ask in a lot of cases, right?
Right.
So what we've really said is, look, you might need to move the data, but you can get value of it across multiple platforms. And you don't have to think of one central platform as the answer to all your problems. So, today, if you are implementing Snowflake, but you also have Netezza sitting around, and maybe you got an Oracle data warehouse and whatever else, you got different tooling for each of those environments. And the engineers can't really work together. The analysts can't see things in a common way. So we provide that kind of common layer. We sometimes call it one door to data across all those environments.
Right. So that's actually a very common use case. And as you know, most of the stuff that we do is in banking, and it's pretty clear. Analytics didn't start today or yesterday. There's been systems, different generations of systems that are concurrently in use. And you have the Oracle people, you have the SAS people, you have the SQL Server people, and you have the Snowflake Databricks people, and you got the CEO saying, "Can we do everything in Power BI and Fabric?" It's a tough sell. It's a tough one. So it's interesting that collaborative analytics is a way to address that with a common tool. And and you mentioned moving the data is a big ask. I think that's why we also see Apache Iceberg taking off so much.
Yeah.
Because owning the storage space is really no one wants to be with the company that you can say this is the last mover in the data space. I'm with the last mover.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
I'll never change. I'll put all my data there. Yeah.
That's what we've been saying for a long time. Is just as soon as you get to my new environment, the latest thing, and that was the original data warehouse, and then it was the data warehouse appliance, and then it was the scale out systems like Hadoop and Hive, and then now it's the cloud data warehouse, and then you have data fabrics, and it's always like this is it. As soon as I get here, I'm good, and
Right.
I just don't think that's it's just not the real world. And you don't have to move all your data to get value from it. And I'd like to think that our industry would start with value and getting value into the business as quickly as possible, and not start with this big giant re-engineering effort, where we're going back to the executive teams and saying, just give me $5 million in a year and a half and I will have solved, world hunger.
I've done that, but yeah, it doesn't work.
It doesn't really work.
It doesn't work. No, jokes aside, the theme of business value is something that obviously it's always been talked about in ROI, and everything's been around forever in terms of total cost of ownership and all these things. But I think right now, the discussions around business value with data are maybe at their highest point.
Yeah.
Because we're sort of at crossroads in terms of decision makers of where to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
To get the maximum. We were just together at the Winter Data Conference, so I was glad to see you in Austria. And
yes.
It's a lot of the discussions have been around business value and getting the maximum out of it, which I welcome very much compared to just let's say pure technical discussions. What was your impression of those business value conversations?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think that for me, this business value push, I kind of put it on this trend that started in 2023. So, in the early 2020, like, oh, the cloud is going to be our solution to everything. So there's a lot of hype and there's a lot of money spent. Kind of in the 2023 time, people started to think, well, a recession might happen. People started to look at their spend and say, okay, you got this big implementation. When are you going to deliver value? And then, a lot of head scratching about, when that was going to happen. I think we've been on kind of a journey where, every data leader is being asked to justify value. And I thought one of the really cool sessions at the conference was the discussion about how you actually build the measurement of value into your program from the outset. Because if you show up at the meeting for the budget and the executive says, okay, so what's the value for this? And you're scratching your head because you haven't done anything about it, you're really on the back foot. But if you build your program with this idea of really being able to measure and demonstrate value, I think there's a lot that can come from that. So I like that conversation. The other thing, which feels to me like kind of a throwback, is this emphasis on enterprise data models and this idea that we're going to actually model our data. So back when the data warehouse was the original thing, and Inman and Kimball, modeling data was something we all learned how to do. But we got into this world where these like low code, fast moving tools came along, and data modeling became a backseat to getting something done quickly. And now we want to go and, automate the business with AI. And, we're sitting here looking at these data structures like, well, a human can't make sense of the data structures. Forget about an intelligent agent, right? It's not going to happen. I did this work for this customer last year that we were building an analytics system that one of the source systems was Salesforce. And I thought, great, the business team's like, hey, I need a really great pipeline value report, because I really can't see what my, life cycle is. Pretty straightforward thing, right? And so, we laid out the strategy, started the work. You start looking at the tables in Salesforce. The opportunity table is kind of like one of the central elements of Salesforce. Like, this is my deal throughout its life cycle. Well, the opportunity table had 250 columns in it, 250, of which 4 of them were purchase order. And they were different names for purchase order. And then there was like different calculations. You need to do a forensic audit of the data to figure out what the heck all this data means before you can do anything with it. Now, I challenge anybody to put an AI agent against my 250 column opportunity table and make sense of it, right? No chance. So I think there's a recognition now that we're going to have to understand the structure of our data, and that's going to, require some data modeling. And the payoff for that is that if we do that well, the AI technology can produce benefit, and we're certainly seeing that result.
Right. Yeah, and as an forensic analyst, I concur. Sometimes you actually, one of the themes and interesting things, I think Joe Reese talked about this, and he always is great on point about those things, the feel of where the industry is going, is that we're at a moment where quality becomes more important. And even reference and look at the village of Tseramse and how beautiful it is. And it wasn't built in 2-week sprints with the cheapest, quickest. It was built with craftsmanship and passion, and software used to be like that. And I think in various, computer games come to mind. Certain types of applications and system programming still is like that. But in the data space, it's kind of the fast food version of let's throw everything into a table. Everything is a big table and you roll with it. And let's slap no code, low code tools on top of it, and everyone will do a great thing. We're at the point where this is not working anymore. And also in the context of data modeling, this was a forgotten discipline. We used to do relational algebra, things like this, even at school, just to figure out and understand those things better. I think there's a slight resurgence of that, because it seems that the data space changed in a way through AI, where you used to have business and IT, and now you have business, IT, data IT, and software engineers that want to do AI engineering. And everyone is looking at the kind of the landscape and trying to figure out, okay, what is the best way to move forward? And so I really like to understand how this collaborative approach can work and combine engineering and analytics in a way where you could build something that's a bit more sustainable than a quick dashboard that runs off of a pipeline that with a small schema drift breaks and everything falls apart.
I think the first challenge, right, is that we have to recognize that these big projects that we've been pitching to our boards and our executives have not gone well. And I think sometimes the do it fast culture is actually an outcome of the fact that we actually already spent $5 million or euros solving what we thought was world hunger, and we didn't. And now the business teams are kind of tired of giving us these big chunks of money, and they want results quickly, right? I actually think that if we can deliver results in some incremental fashion in a structured way, that kind of dual world of first we got the big money, we didn't get results, now we're just throwing technology at it. we can meet in the middle. Now, there's an engineering discipline, right? As you said, kind of software engineering has been thinking about components, ever since object-oriented software came along, right? That, I had hair when that was happening, right? And and I actually had a goatee as well, but that's hard to believe. But as every hip software engineer did, by the way, somehow, kind of missed the data space and, kind of, we got focused on these big giant pipelines. One is SQL wasn't really object oriented, right? So that was a problem. So, I got customers who have 10,000 line SQL stored procedures, right? And if they need to do anything with it, they copy it because it's too, and then they make some modification to it. And, it just becomes a spaghetti mess, right? So I do think that there is an emerging, trend in the data space to think about reusable object-oriented components. And, I would actually give credit to DBT for helping to push that approach. But others like ourselves, and there's a whole host of providers now who have recognized that we have to break things into components. So just the idea of introducing componentized development practices is critical, right? And that's not a technology, kind of thing. It's a change in approach, right? And people have to be realized that change of approach is going to pay off for them. You would never
Right.
have a software engineer writing, in line piece of spaghetti code in an application today, right? They would be out, right? No software engineering leader, no team would accept that, kind of approach. So that's one thing. And the other thing is I think we need to start with the business, right? So, we need to think about for each different business area, what are the things that they need, and build these components in a way that involves the downstream teams, right? So one of the things about data engineering, and this is probably true of a lot of disciplines, is that, we would go to the business and say, what do you need? And the business says, I need, X, Y, Z. And so we go build it, right? It takes time. We build it. We deliver it to them. And they say, well, that's great. X, Y, Z is useful, but I also need Q, right? So the standard reaction of the data team is, well, you didn't ask for Q, right? So, that's another thing. We'll have to go back and add that to, and that's just not going to work, right? So we need to build the components such that they can actually create Q themselves, right? We're
Right.
increasingly in a world where people at the edge of the business actually know the analytical problem that they're trying to solve as well or better. And we need a way for them to add on components and ingest them into our core pipeline. And we need a governance process to go with that. Now, we provide that, but I don't think it's just based on us doing that. I think that's a question of, as an industry, we need to recognize we have to componentize things, and the data engineering team isn't going to solve everybody's problem.
Exactly. And I think that there's on the business side, there's a realization right now, especially with the rise of AI, but also even prior to that, is that the upskilling has to happen on both sides, right? So you got business folks, domain experts being more technical, understanding in greater detail, kind of the data workings under the hood, the pipelines, they're actually writing the code. As you mentioned, sometimes they're actually very proficient at that. While at the same time, it's no longer acceptable, and it's also even an issue in hiring, where you're a software engineer, a data engineer, and you are just saying, well, I just need the specs and I'll develop. You have to have kind of this meeting together in the middle. If you were leading a business team, then becoming more technical, and leading a technical team becoming more akin to what the business does and how it works. I think that's unavoidable.
And
And
it's a
certainly,
practice thing, right? Because you think about it, we've all heard about the edge or shadow IT out in the business. Well, clearly they have some technical abilities because they've gone and done their own thing. Why have they done their own thing? Because we didn't give them any way to work with us, right? So we sat over here and built our beautiful, pristine environment. It didn't meet their needs. They would have used it if it did. Let's be honest, right? Business people are under pressure to deliver business value. They're not funding local IT because they're, actually secretly data, engineers, right? They're doing it because the central stuff didn't deliver what they needed, right? And we didn't have any way for them to work with us, right? So we gotta recognize that, right?
Like, I just had a conversation with a customer yesterday, and he was like, Ivo, but what you're saying is like that meme where if it's central, decentralized, if it's decentral, centralized. And I'm like, yeah, I've done this before. It's true. He's like, you're joking, right? It's like, no, it's actually how it's supposed to work, because oftentimes there isn't perfect setup and you do it once and that's it. You need to adjust. And sometimes that is exactly kind of the back and forth that you need to do to kind of reach a more optimal setup for your situation. It's not a permanent thing.
I was thinking about, kind of the experience of COVID, right? So, as I was saying, I was
The podcast will get flagged COVID. I don't think they do it anymore. Sorry. They used to once you say COVID and it's like information about. Go ahead. I think we're good. Sorry for this.
Well, I just remember that, I did all this work at retail in Nielsen, right? We built these big analytic pipelines, and we had to do price prediction, right? Amongst other things, we were doing price optimization. Well, think about, we built these big extensive things, and then along comes COVID. And now the people in the business are like, well, give me a repricing model that takes into account the fact that people are now, shopping online and they have to drive up and, delivery and what do we say? Like, well, we didn't build that into our stuff because it hadn't happened, right? So the classic answer would be like, well, give me 6 months and I'll update my models based on all these new factors. Like, well, if you're in the business, like, well, I got to ship product next week, right? I don't have 6 months. Business is changing all the time, right? So, if we have these big rigid structures, we can't adapt, and we have to be able to adapt. And the only way we're going to adapt is if we include people at the edge in our process and create collaboration. So it's not like, local shadow IT versus central, battle. It has to be, a collaborative environment. And by the way, the only way that collaborative environment is going to work is if you do create components and reusability and structure, right? You can't do one without the other.
That's what Agile was supposed to be about. That's what we asked for, but all we got was your best thinking in 2-week increments.
Right.
No, that's absolutely true. It's 100% true. In the kind of the collaboration with the edge, I think the lines are getting and going to be more and more blurred, which is something with which both service companies, product companies, and enterprises need to come to grips with. How do you think the labor market, and especially kind of the market for data engineering, data analysts, is changing? What is a piece of advice that you could give to data engineers and data analysts?
Well, I mean, so one piece of advice that I've given to people for as long as I've been doing this is, learn about the business, not just the technology, right? So, if you actually understand the domain that you're working in and the problems that your customers are trying to solve, and you have some technical background, you are more resilient than otherwise, right? And it's amazing to me how often I go into a big organization and the technical team just doesn't even understand the business, right? Because they're very focused on their technical skills. And the other thing which relates to that is, this is certainly true in my career. The only thing I can tell you about what you're going to be working on in 18 months is it's going to be different than what you're working on today, right? I've seen God knows how many different changes to technology, including 7 complete generations of data architectures. And, it's understanding the fundamentals and understanding the business that's really critical. And I think the fundamentals include understanding how to model data, right? So, I think that's going to be universal, because there's just some core, call it mathematical principles that go with how you think about data that people need to learn. But, what I was surprised at, and you and I also were at Day-to-Day Texas together, right? And there was a big discussion about, the impact of AI on data engineering. And there's like this debate between a very dystopian view of the future, like the AI is going to replace us all, and we're going to be like living in Detroit after the auto industry disappeared. And the other end of the spectrum, which is like, oh, it's going to be like we're going to do everything faster and it's going to be better. AI is just going to make our lives great. Probably the reality is somewhere in the middle, right? is going to cause some displacement, and that's a reality, but it is going to also open more doors. And so understand fundamentals and be prepared to adapt, right? I have a daughter who's a senior in college, about to graduate university. This is going to get me in trouble, by the way. But, when ChatGPT came along, the first reaction of all the universities and schools was, you can't use it, right? And,
Right.
My daughter came to me and she says, Dad, every student is using ChatGPT, every single one, right? It's like, nobody's writing a paper from scratch with an open, book and starting from zero. And my response to that is great. Learn how to use this technology, because prompt engineering and, kind of using AI agents to improve how you write, that's the world we're in. Writing has changed forever, whether we like it or
Forever.
not, right?
Forever.
And if we tell our kids not to use the new stuff, right? Go back and do it the way we had to do it. They're not going to be, it's the kids who do understand it who are going to be most successful and most productive, right? So sorry, Ella, but I'm outing you that I know you're using AI, and I say go for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's 100% agree. And based on the discussions in day-to-day Texas, I'm firmly on the optimist side of things. It just strikes me as absolutely weird how super smart, intelligent people would be afraid of not doing what they've done for the past years because of AI. In fact, there'll be a lot more for them to do, and it is just lazy to think otherwise, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think,
Actually,
yeah, I
I've
was
seen this
thinking,
thing before with
go ahead.
people. I said a client where they got some great engineers doing Hadoop, and I'm like, well, let's just drop it and move it to Snowflake. I mean, what your use case here is absolutely, there's no reason for this to live in Hadoop anymore. It's like, look what year this is. And they're like, no, but you don't know. It's like Spark jobs is like super. And after, so full backlash. And I spoke to the client, and I'm like, why are these guys so much against that? I mean, you would think that they would want to do the new stuff. They're super smart keeping this complex Hadoop cluster. They can do anything in this organization and be good at it. Why would they be afraid to give up their Hadoop kingdom? Same story in the broader space. I actually wanted to go back to a point that you mentioned earlier, which is this data modeling stuff, where even when I went to university 20, my God, when was it? 20 years ago. Data modeling, first semester, first year at university. What is a model? Or representation of reality, representation of objects in the organization. Now it seems like everyone's back to, okay, if the data engineers are going to understand the business, they have to understand the components of it. But then one thing that was, I don't know whether you brought this up or who brought it into discussion, was like this process view, right? So you have to understand. So data modeling is the one step, but actually modeling the processes, it also in a fundamentally correct way, becomes important again. We have to reinvent how we think about basic business things and combine technology with it. How do you think this is going to develop and affect the industry?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic. So, kind of part of the discussion, right, in Zell was like, should you data model in a traditional relational warehouse, or do Kimball, or do, Data Vault? Don't do Data Vault, but or whatever, right? Here's how I think about it. The first thing is that I just think that you have to think about your data model in terms of the value chain of your organization, right? So, and I actually think that kind of a Kimball style, call it a bus architecture, is a great way to think about a value chain. But why do you want to think about your data in a value chain? Because the whole organization is about delivering value, and there's a chain of activities that you need. And the more that your data architecture represents what's actually happened in the business, the more you're going to provide insights. But here's the thing. The data model doesn't tell you how you got from one stage to another, right? You have orders, and then you have shipments, and then you have deliveries, and then, you have consumption, right? And these are facts, right? But how did you get from the order to the shipment, right? That's a process. And our data architectures, our data models don't actually have that process information in it. But if we're going to transform the business with AI, we need the process information, right? Because that's what AI wants to do. AI wants to improve the process, right? So it isn't enough just to have the traditional facts. We're going to have to think about how we augment this data model, which I, again, think a value chain model is the right way to go. We need to augment it with process information. And what I've been really interested in, and by the way, I don't have a full answer to this, is the concept of digital twins, right? So a digital twin is, a digital representation of your entire business process, and it is data plus process. And I think that there's a thread there that needs to be pulled, and it's actually one that I'm thinking about. As I was asking Joe, right, because I do think Joe Reese has some really great insights, like, okay, how do you do this? And his answer is, I think is like, yeah, I think we need to do it. I don't know how to do it yet. So I think it's kind of an innovation area. And some may disagree with me, say, no, data and process should remain separate. But I think data and process need to come together in a modeling framework. And I think that the framework needs to be based on your value chain. And I think that there's a conceptual way to think about that, which is kind of a digital twin. And that's kind of where my head is at.
Exactly. And I also fully agree. The only thing I can add to that is it's going to come out of the next productionizing state of agents. It just boggles my mind how, if you looked at many companies, everyone's like, oh, agents, we're great at that. We're already doing. I mean, how can you be so great at something that just came out yesterday and we haven't even figured out what the proper methodology for this is? You already have an answer with, oh yeah, we have this multi-agent blah, blah, blah framework with No, you ain't got nothing, because that's just the first step of the first step of something that's going to evolve in the next 2 or 3 years, where it becomes commonplace with a standard. We can actually go ahead in the companies and do it, because every project that I'm aware of in the enterprise, and I'm not talking big tech, but they also certainly have that as well, has been a failure with AI. And I hear 80%. No, 100%. Yes, some things have worked. Yes, some things have actually delivered value, but all of them are obsolete, because the way that we did things 12 months ago is not the same way how we do things now in AI. And much in a similar way, I think, to your point about process and data, we just haven't figured it out yet, because that has to fit this collaborative intelligence, data modeling, process modeling, and being able technology-wise to capture it and feed it to an AI system with a feedback loop is something we haven't figured out yet.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's
I think that's fair.
Both at in Zell and in Texas, and I've been to 3 or 4 events this year. Everybody's talking about agents. Like, I have yet to find anybody who's actually implemented agents and delivered value, and I haven't yet to find anybody who's answered the question, like, how do you deal with the fact that these models are rigid, right? They don't produce the same answer all the time. They're probabilistic, right? So
yeah, it's a more probabilistic step. Yeah.
It's one thing to give that to an expert, right, and improve their code writing. And we do that. And we do that in our software for our customers, and we do that ourselves, right? But in that case, the models, what they're doing is they're producing a starter code, or they're producing components, or they're doing error checking, but there still is an expert there who is being more productive through the use of this technology. I think that's real. It's real in our software. It's real today in a lot of places. But taking the next step, where the agent is going to be in the hands of the business person, and they're just going to answer questions about the business or give them advice that they hadn't thought of, I haven't seen that, and I don't think we're close to that yet.
And I just actually recorded a podcast with Josue Bogran, who is the Databricks guy, very, very smart guy. And, actually would quote him here and say, it is going to be an AI agent when I see that AI agent on the org chart, okay? Then it's an agent if it shows up on the org chart, because otherwise it's just a workflow with a couple of probabilistic components and maybe a few other tweaks that make it a bit more autonomous, but it really isn't an agent. It's a piece of software with you cobbled together in a framework that's already obsolete 6 months from now. But
get the data right. Get the data right. Get the data right first. You're not going to solve the world hunger overnight, right? And then build on it.
One of the things that I find interesting about this statement is it's so obvious that it's almost like, yeah, right. But then you talk to the software engineers and no one is saying that. like in the software engineering space, I have yet to hear an AI engineer saying get the data right. They're like, no, put this and that together, connect it to that API to that, or we do a local deployment, or like this model, we do this and that around it, and boom, you go. No, but then again, that's kind of the tug between data engineering, software engineering, and
Yeah,
kind
I
of
love that
business.
you said that earlier on, right? Because I think that's very true, that there is this, different kind of mindset, right? And software engineers, they have got componentization down, but their data modeling, oh my gosh, it's just terrible, right? They're not data modelers, and they don't think about data models. They think about just the data structure I need to support this little process, right? And that's great, but if that data's got to be part of a downstream architecture, that's not in their world, and gluing together agents ain't going to solve it. Right?
It was never the case. It's more so. It always, the basic assumption was to think in, I create a function, input output, whatever piece of software it is, but then the data people always thought about what's the content of it, what comes through this input and output. And it's not like, okay, we just do the function, you guys test it, you guys figure it out, and let me know if something's wrong. But yeah, that's also one of the reasons why the data industry exists, and why it's this special thing, unlike the developers of software. And also, I think it has a reason to continue to exist, and provide lots of value. Yeah, certainly.
I think to your point about being optimistic, right? I think that if you are early in your career now and you think about understanding data and data architectures, data models, and you think about understanding the business problems you're addressing and kind of come problem back to the technology, and then you just see the technology as just the latest, and you have a kind of learning attitude about technology because it's going to change. I think if you have those three things, data architecture understanding, focus on the business, and a learning attitude about technology, I think you can have an awesome career, right?
Rick, I think it's a great piece of advice for our listeners, and also I can only add to that. At this point in computing, I think we're at the point where just learning the history of it has a value in and of itself, because
Yeah,
you'd understand where we came from. That people made thoughts about this a long time ago, and it's fascinating. I had a chance to meet Bill Inman in Texas, and also listen to his talk. I mean, all of these data issues that we have right now, people, probably smarter people, thought about this 30, 40 years ago in great depth, and some of these concepts just didn't materialize because of storage or compute power or what have you. But certainly there's enough fundamentals out there to figure out before you go and think that the latest framework is just the best thing, and that's it, and everything before it is just obsolete. Yeah.
true.
But
And when I
it's
started, Inman was the teacher, or Kimball were the teachers, right? So I was the young guy listening to them. So those guys really did contribute a lot, and we need to bring that around.
yeah. Yeah. um what are some other observations that you have on the let's say on the discussions that we had in Texas or in Cell? I think one thing that I would suggest is just the data community in itself is I think a very special sort of people. Well, I'd like to hear your thoughts about how you view the data community. Is it something distinct or not compared to?
Yeah, I mean, it's, so I thought both in Texas and really particularly in Zell, the community aspect was really cool, right? So, people are sitting around and talking to each other about, kind of ideas and, kind of a lot of sharing. So I think it is a special community. I think that, what was interesting is that, and something I think those of us who've been around a while need to think about is that, the young people like in Zell, and I heard the same thing in Texas, they feel a tremendous amount of pressure right now, right? And they're concerned, and they're, like, got to produce this really quickly, and they feel a little bit under pressure. And I think we have to think about how do we empower them to go on this career journey and not get burned out, right? Because that, when we think about the idea of the optimist versus the pessimist, I think that actually you could probably draw an age correlation. And, the people who've been around a long time were more optimistic than the people who are in the trenches right now. They were a little bit more pessimistic. So that's a challenge on us is how do we, make sure that they have the opportunity to learn, right? I don't have the answer to that, but I
No,
think
it's a
that's
great it's a great insight and something that that certainly would be valuable to anyone listening, figuring out, okay, should I go into this data thing? Is it just gonna, just gonna get ChatGPT generating SQL for me, and then all the dashboards are gonna pop up automatically? And do I need to go and study this? And the answer is yes, you should.
yeah,
If you're interested in that. That's also something, listening to another podcast recently. It's like there's always been a team, kind of the missionaries versus the mercenaries, right? And so, people that really like their craft, that enjoy the industry, that are just curious about it. I mean, none of them, like literally not a single one of them, is going to be left behind by AI.
they're not. Yeah,
But the casuals, the ones that are just in it because, well, I could just learn some Python in a couple of months and maybe some Power BI chops, and then I'm good to go. Well, maybe figure something else that's more of interest to you. It's certainly a fork in the road for people to think about going more serious into the data industry. And if they do, just like you mentioned earlier, get on the fundamentals, learn the basic concepts, learn them in more depth, and you'd enjoy a great career over time, even though things will change, right?
yeah, yeah,
It's highly
absolutely.
unlikely that.
Embrace change. That's we're not getting off the change bandwagon, and just becoming a great Python engineer. There's going to be something else, and so that's where the fundamentals are so important. The first guy that hired me in data space, he was a kind of a mathematician by training, and he had two things that I thought were really cool. One is he never interviewed your capability to write C code. It was always about thinking and right. His strategy for interviewing was find whatever the person is passionate about and get them to describe it at the lowest level, right? Show that you can take a problem and break it down into its fundamental bits. Because he thought that if you can apply that kind of thinking approach where you're looking all the way down and understanding the basics, the fundamentals, it'll work for you on whatever you do. And, it was a great lesson for me. And I've always tried to think about, hiring people with that thinking capability as opposed to just a skill, right? Too much skill focus, not enough thinking focus is kind of how I'd put that. The other thing that he did, which I thought was kind of cool, it's still relevant today, is he hired a lot of musicians to become data engineers because his view was that if you understand music, you understand patterns of logic and the fundamentals of notes, and that actually translates really well to the data. And I thought that was kind of cool at the time. And I still, I was talking to a young musician the other day and kind of making that analogy to them that, what you're actually learning about, that logic is actually going to help you in this world of, AI, et cetera. But
100%, 100%, 100%. And music and math correlate in a great way. And just hiring math people and statistics people is just a great idea, in general. But this first principle thinking, this fundamentals thinking, I mean, this is not common. This is way less common than you think. And I'd always prefer to hire for that. I mean, essentially, I'm in a consulting business, and if you have that plus a slight tolerance for uncertainty, then you'd be the perfect consultant, right?
yeah, yeah.
So because everything else you can acquire pretty easily, and that's not the main thing. The main thing is to actually be able to solve problems, and that kind of skill sometimes degrades over time.
But it's back to, what you were saying. You were fortunate that in your education, they taught you about modeling and relational algebra and, kind of those fundamentals. A lot of people are like, okay, you're going to learn Python. And Python's useful. I love Python. But, if you don't also learn those first principles, you're going to really struggle when things change, right? And if you learn first principles, you learn how to think, you know, the there's a lot of hope for the future.
Certainly. Just before we wrap this thing up, is there? I'd like your take on just switching gear back to the enterprise, if you're a C-level enterprise person and you know you have a massive re-platforming on your hands because of, yeah, you're not going to put everything in one platform, but you certainly have to decommission a bunch of stuff. What would be your advice to them about thinking in choosing new data platforms? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are a couple things, right? So you mentioned iceberg tables and open table formats, and I wouldn't recommend anybody implement a platform today that they didn't have that in their eyesight, and maybe think about whatever their data platform is, that they're going to put the data in an iceberg, structure underneath, because that's going to open them up, that they're not locked into whatever that platform is. That's the first thing I would say. Or maybe that's the second thing I say, because the first thing I would say is that don't try to implement any platform selection as a big bang, right? Really make sure that you're going to deliver value to your business people incrementally. And that means focusing on them. And that means focusing on empowering them, and back to, kind of the component stuff. The big bang platform replatforming efforts, I think, are dead, or should be. And then if you think about building that logical data framework that's above your platforms, many platforms, then you can start to componentize when you phase them out, and you can deliver value along the way. In terms of the platforms themselves, I mean, they're all really powerful now. So Databricks, Snowflake, BigQuery, Fabric, these things are really powerful technologies. And I don't think you can go wrong with you're not going to go wrong based on your technology selection. You're going to go wrong because you have too much of a project, too long of a time frame, or because you don't think about the modeling of the data in the integration, or you don't solve business problems fast enough. The average life expectancy of a CDAO is like 18 months. That's pretty scary, right? These projects are not, these mega projects, they're not, 18 months is a pretty short time frame for some of these things. So if you go with a mega project and you get approval for it, you're putting yourself at risk, because you don't have, the business gets tired of how quickly you can deliver value. So I say, think about data architecture before you think about platform. Use open table formats when you do, and deliver business value first and foremost.
Right. It's about the average tenure. I think the life expectancy out of super remains the same. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. This is a great piece of advice. And I'll just add what Eva Maya was saying also about the human factors and the soft skills. Make sure that your team are not, until you're fully running on AI agents, you have humans working for you that are going to do this. So you need to empower them, make sure they're doing fine, and they have the tools and the support they need to get that thing done. And yeah,
it's so important to have somebody like her talking in the industry, because back to that earlier point about the pessimist and the optimist, these young career people are pessimistic. We must not be treating them very well. And so, you really do have to treat people well, empower them. That is so fundamental.
It's a philosophical discussion about that, and it certainly, well, it's a feeling that goes throughout society, but there's no logical reasons behind it. It's the best of times. We've never had it better, regardless of the current news flow. So it's good to be reminded of that. Thank you so much, Rick, for your time for this. It's been a great conversation. How can people find you if they want to link with you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. So, Richard Hall, my rick.hall at coginity.co. Hey, I'm perfectly fine when people send me an email, but find me on LinkedIn, find me, and go check out our stuff, right? If you're interested in this kind of idea of not being stuck on one platform and collaboration, coginity.co. Check us out. And by the way, tell me what you think.
Excellent. Thanks, Rick. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Ivo. Pleasure to talk to you.